Okay, I've heard the chime. It's time for our session to get started. It is just a great pleasure to have you here with us today for the Center for Women in Cyber Leadership Series, a part of the Capital Technology University. Now, let's go ahead and move the timer off. We don't need that anymore. Our session is being recorded, and we'll be sending a link to the recording and a link to the slides to everyone this afternoon. Now, our Oh my goodness, that's a mistake. I'm going to move on very quickly here. I just realized I left on the last speaker, and my apologies for that. But we'll introduce our correct speaker in just a moment. Here's the agenda we'll be following after my face gets unread, and that is I'm going to talk a little bit about capital. I know we have a few people joining us today who are not familiar with us. Session pointers and housekeeping, and I have a little special announcement during that time. I'll introduce the Center for Women in Cyber. I'll talk about our presenter, and then I'll give the floor to Dr. Emily Barnes for the presentation, and there'll be Q&A after the presentation. Then I'll talk about the upcoming webinars, recording slides and certificate, and we'll get the Q&A again as well toward the end. Now, just a little bit about capital. And by the way, I want to mention again, this session is being recorded. Many of you are very familiar with our university. In fact, some are currently students, faculty, or staff. But we were established almost 100 years ago. In just 2 years, we'll be celebrating our 100th anniversary. We're located in Laurel, Maryland, just outside of Washington, D.C., between D.C. and Baltimore. And we are a technological university working on STEM-related degrees. And so this webinar today is very much in keeping with the kinds of programs that we offer. We offer regionally accredited degrees all the way from the associates right up to the doctorate. And in fact, Dr. Barnes has 2 doctorates, and one of them is from Capital as well. We'll talk more about that when I introduce her. Here is some housekeeping. We'll answer questions at the conclusion of the presentation, but at any time you can type them into the text chat. I'll be monitoring that, and we'll throw the questions out to Dr. Barnes at the end of her presentation. And then if we have time at the very end of this webinar, we'll come back to any further questions. I'm not activating microphones and webcams for participants today, so the way that you need to communicate with us is through the text chat. And as I mentioned, we'll be sending a link to the recording as well as a link to the slides to everybody who has registered for this session. We know that many of you will be joining us on demand later on, and we want to let you know that a participation certificate is available to both those who attend the live session and those who are on demand viewers watching it later. Now, with that, I have a very special announcement. I wanted to recognize 3 webinar participants who are all in the session today and who have all attended 10 webinars in a row. This would be the 11th, actually. Masha Radulovic from Serbia, Raquel Massey from the USA, and Aslak Mulvar from Norway. This was based on, over the last 10 webinars, each of them have requested a certificate of participation, so I knew they attended the full session. I'd like to just thank them, and in extension, thanking everybody who's participated in these webinars. Obviously, for these 3 individuals, this goes back way beyond just this year. This goes back well into last year to get all 10 sessions. I thank them, and I thank you for joining us today. Now, let me talk just a little bit about the Center for Women in Cyber. This is the 3rd and final webinar in the Cyber Leadership Series. Capital Technology University Center for Women in Cyber, CWC, is focused on empowering individuals of all ages to pursue degrees in cyber. This center seeks to address the growing need for professionals and leaders in cyber-related fields. The technology field's gender gap is a persistent challenge. The CWC encourages individuals to seek opportunities in the important and developing field of cybersecurity so that their contributions can be embraced. Women leaders are unmatched in terms of creativity, perspective, and collaboration. That is so much in keeping with what Dr. Barnes is going to be talking about today, even though she's not going to be talking about cyber women in the technical fields. And so I'm so excited to have her here today. Even if I put the wrong person here, but we'll I'm sorry, that was an error on my part, but here is the presentation. Miss AI, this is your moment, addressing gender bias in AI. Let me introduce Dr. Barnes and then give her the floor. Dr. Barnes is an AI researcher, higher education leader, and advocate for ethical technology and women in STEM. She has 2 earned doctorates, a PhD in artificial intelligence from Capital, and a Doctor of Education degree in Organizational Leadership and Higher Education Administration from Maryville University in St. Louis. She has served as a university provost, chief digital learning officer, and a consultant guiding institutions through digital transformation. She is currently a senior content strategist, UX UI with Core Education. She also serves as a board advisor to the Artificial Intelligence Center here at Capital, and she is the author or co-author of 24 scholarly articles related to AI and machine learning and deep neural networks. Her work focuses on integrating responsible AI into education and workforce development, addressing bias in emerging technologies, and creating pathways for women to lead in tech-driven fields. Now, with that, I'm going to stop sharing and give the floor over to Dr. Barnes. So bear with us as we make this transition, and then she will have the floor. All right, thank you very much. And I think we're all set. So I'll give it to you, Dr. Barnes.
Wonderful. Thank you. And thank you for having me today. So I always appreciate the opportunity. I am an alum of Capital Technology University and, currently working across multiple areas within AI. And I'm just happy to have this opportunity to speak to you all about something that I believe is extremely important for today's market, especially as technologies continue to evolve. So today's topic is titled Ms. AI or Miss AI. This is your moment, and I'll tell you why that is. The future of intelligence, human and artificial, will be built by those who dare to lead it, who are involved, who have a voice or carved a place out for them to speak and to be present. Your time to shape it, challenge it, and claim, and for some of you, reclaim your role in it is now, because the evolution of AI will always be stronger because you were a part of it. So I'm going to start with that, and then we're going to go through my next slide, which is a little crazy looking, but we get it there. Okay, so what you're seeing here is on the top row, there are pictures of women who have been historically involved with artificial intelligence and the progression of technology over the years. And then in the bottom half, there are generations of AI, and I'm calling it generations of AI for a very specific reason. And just to, so I don't bury the lead, the reason why is because even early developments in artificial intelligence are still being carried over through generations of development today. And that is how we have a variety of historical biases implanted within the technology that we're using now on a daily basis. So on this slide, you're seeing those generations, how bias emerges, evolves, and scales as these systems advance. So we'll start with the beginning with Ada Lovelace. Some of you may be extremely familiar with her, but she started in the 1840s. And this person was the first one to publish what we now call a computer program. She predicted a core truth that machines will reflect the assumptions we build into them. And that theme runs through every generation you see here. Moving to the 20th century, we see Edith Clark, and human computers of that era show us that computation has always been intertwined with human judgment and human bias long before these digital systems actually existed. And then next, in the world of symbolic AI era, we have Karen Jones set the foundation for modern information retrieval. Her principle that believed that information retrieval should be about reducing bias. And this became essential decades later for search engines and also NLP models, or natural language processing models. As we continue to shift into the machine learning realm, or the machine learning era, women like Cynthia Dwork advanced fairness and differential privacy, worked on critical protections as algorithms started to learn from data rather than these rules-based approach. At the same time, Fei-Fei Li worked on ImageNet fueled by deep learning, while revealing how data sets also design how data set design can amplify bias at scale. So again, we're looking at, on the next slide, we're going to look at how that model really kind of works from a simplified approach, but she really worked at how does this data set design amplify bias in the end product or the end model itself. Moving towards the generative AI, which is right here in the middle around 2020. All of you guys are aware of this one. We see leaders like Joy Buolamwini and Timnit Gebru demonstrating how facial recognition and language models embed racial and gender bias. We've talked about studies where facial recognition systems are more likely to misrepresent women of color and minorities overall, because again, we're looking at historical data and how those models have been trained. So looking at Emily Bender's, so Stochastic Parrots, her work gave language to the risks of large language models, and Kate Crawford reframed AI as a socio-technical system with real-world environmental and political consequences. Mira Murati played a major role in leadership behind more of our frontier models like ChatGPT, Claude, and others. So now that we've made it through 2020, 2022, 2024, one, we see that AI is progressing more quickly than ever. And that this idea that machines can now act like humans is becoming more prevalent. When AI started, we overgeneralized the word AI, as like these different technologies, but AI is not necessarily referring to technologies themselves. It's more of an all-encompassing term, speaking towards how machines are now starting to act and learn and be like us. And we see that also in future developments where with agentic AI, this AI can plan, take action, and manage tasks autonomously, make decisions on their own. Biggest risk factors, we think about progression in warfare and autonomous weapons, and they gave it a great term called solder bots. I don't want to talk about that, but as we continue to progress, we have more of that neuromorphic AI that's coming very soon, 2026, 2027. And then we got AGI, which will be mass available to the public, I believe, within 2 to 4 years, probably maximum. But looking at this overall, these women who have contributed to this area, Cynthia Breezaw, Anka Dragon, Angela Young, and Julia Shaw, all of them are here on this end, work in social robotics, reward design, and human AI coordination, and how that defines how agents interact with safety and with people. So going back to AGI, neuromorphic AI, we see these new opportunities also come with substantial risk, and bias is still embedded deep within those cognitive architectures from a time when many of this was developed, again, 50, 60, 70 years prior to this time. And that's how I want to start this presentation, is one, looking at how generations of bias has been inherited by each individual generation. And I want you to think about that, if we may, as far as, think about family lineage and, having, a great grandfather or great grandmother who feels very strongly a certain way, and how that some of that might have transcended into your parents, and then where it is in you, might have been filtered down or enhanced then now to the generations that come after us. So this is such a foundational and core issue around how we're executing these technologies, because as we build, we are continuing to reinforce the same biases that have been reflected throughout generations of time, as well as through generations of technology. So I'm going to show you a very simplified model. For those of you who know a whole lot about this, just a caveat, it is extremely simplified for a broader audience. So this is how bias, looking at it in a very simplified form, how bias finds its way into our data sets and into our training and into how we execute these models. So I'm going to start at the top. For those of you who can't see, I'll do my best to make sure I'm articulating that aloud. But gender bias in machine learning it starts from the data. So where's that data being sourced? How is it being sourced? Are we representing the individuals, the diversity that we need in these data sets? Because that data, whether it's structured or unstructured, is going into the big pile called data, and how that data is then selected You can also see where humans are involved. So each of these little guys is where a human impacts. So humans impacting what data is stored, what data is collected, what data is used as far as training data and testing data, which we see coming into play down here. So what features are we selecting and why? All these are intentional choices that are being made prior to training models. Once that pre-processed data is then gone to the training and the testing phases, we're looking to see how are we training this algorithm to process and to then execute this data so that we have either, it can be predictive or it can be, whatever model we're using, but these are still developed by humans. So the algorithm is developed by humans, the data is cleaned by humans, the data is collected by humans. How that model's tuned, how weights are adjusted, again, is influenced by humans. All of those factors are being touched and handled by humans to some degree and has been throughout history. So then as we evaluate performance, we're making final determinations with our own human influence, and we're interpreting those results with our human bias, and we are forming conclusions with our predefined behaviors and predefined thoughts of what's true or not true and what this means and what it doesn't mean. And as we continue to progress, I'll keep talking about why this is important to have a wide variety of people, voices, a large audience included and contributing to these areas, because again, those who insert themselves and those who show up to be there are going to have influence over this process and influence how we evaluate the performance of these models and how we're forming conclusions from these models. And that's where we're going to get started today. So we got a little bit of history, a very simplified how this works and how bias gets into the process of creating models. But now let's talk about where things are today. So across the globe, worldwide, there is a massive underrepresentation of women in technology. If you ask my mother's generation, she would say, well, this is just, women aren't technical. That's what she would say. We were taught that if you were in technology or if you had skills in logic or math, you were masculine, right? And this is during a time when that wasn't okay. And, you also have very clear defined structures of how women were able to join these areas in different generations. So then my mother's generation, not part of the technology, not technical, whatever that means. I don't know how to do this. She'll even say, I don't know how to do this because I'm a woman. And I'm like, okay, we're talking here, Mom. Okay. You were there when I was born. So I think that these are critical factors that play into the next generation. So then you have women who have been told that arts and humanities and nurture roles and nurture positions and helping roles are more comfortable for them. It's part of your nature. You want to have a human impact. And my message today, very simply, is that human impact can be local, it can be larger, or it can be global. And when you're involved in technology, it's global impact. And that's as far as wanting to be involved in how in humanity and how interacting with people. If that's the scope of our female skill set, then this is the place where women definitely need to be. So again, AI researchers, 12% overall. This is global. Women who are considered AI professionals, 22% of all within technology. And then women in STEM, recommend, nope, they represent about 26% of the entire industry globally. And that's a number that I think we can even see, localized, how many women versus how many men may be in a technology program and why aren't they here? There can be a lot of reasons, but it can come down to mentorship, role modeling, having more women as mentors, or men also taking a more intentional step as far as making sure that technology is represented by a more inclusive audience and across genders specifically. Next slide. So over all these manifestations of AI and bias, there's a few themes. So historical data has been used to train these models, which perpetuate continued bias through data. There's misalignment among models, number 2 here, where the model is properly chosen for data, and whether or not the model was appropriately chosen for the data that's in, as far as for training and testing. An overall lack of awareness. I think that it's common to see short-term gain over long-term stability and long-term planning. So how do we get it out there as fast as possible, speed the market, let's just skip over the diligence, no time for prudence, that kind of thing. Unproductive policies as far as how this is implemented, developed, do we have a core understanding of how best to develop these technologies without influencing with bias? And if we do add policies, is it then restricting innovation? So all hot topics today. But I think short-sightedness is also, the short game. It's a clear indicator. We're not thinking long-term. We're thinking about the immediate future instead of thinking 6 generations down the pipeline. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about where you can see this showing up across industries. So AI does show up across industries. So I think about, like, how does this bias impact, AI across fields today? And the bias that emerged, of course, in machine learning period that we discussed, 2 slides before, include things like deep learning and generative AI and agentic systems. And they all have the same underlying data patterns. So this is still being perpetuated throughout multiple generations of technology. But during this machine learning era, algorithms began learning from large historical sets. So we see that what was evident in large historical data is representing that time and place more than it is representing today. So for instance, social inequalities in medical fields, or gender and racial disparities in education, how does that impact outcomes today as far as utilizing these systems when we're utilizing these huge data sets to train these massive models, but they're coming from a time and place where most women weren't in the workforce, or there wasn't as much access to, or less accessibility for minorities overall to education, healthcare, et cetera. And that's still showing up today. So I'm going to dig in a little bit more into each one of these. And we'll start with medicine. So I'll start with I'll give you a little example, and then we'll talk about why this is. So looking at healthcare, so bias in clinical AI against Black and Latin patients. So this is 2023, 2024. So this is recent work from Yale and Rutgers. They show that AI algorithms used for risk prediction and treatment planning can excuse me, can under-recommend care. And it under-recommends care specifically for these audiences because the data used for training came from a time when utilization or EHR data and cost or utilization was less among these populations. So we're looking at algorithms that are now trained on if this care or feature is lower spending, that means that there's lower risk, because the way that this data trained the system is that these patients historically receive less care for the same level of need. And then the model learned that lowering spending meant lower spending meant lower risk, and that embedded structural racism into the target variable. Because again, we're using massive historical data to train these models. Next, so in the workplace, the recent case of Workday AI hiring bias lawsuit 2024-2025. So in Mobley versus Workday, a class action lawsuit alleged that Workday AI-driven applicant screening and recommendation tools discriminate against on the basis of race, age, and disability. And recently, court allowed that case to move forward. So why did it occur? So the screening models used appear to have learned from historical hiring and performance data, which already encoded patterns of underselection for older workers, disabled applicants, and racial minorities. And these can be even simplified if you want to go back in time a little bit further to when this happened among Amazon with that huge case, I think about 5 years ago, where, if you went to a women's college or, were part of a women's association, you would have a rejected application because, again, that data is disappearing from the results. because of how it was trained. It was trained during a time when there was more men present, so it was automatically favoring details that would apply to that would be commonly seen in a male's resume. Moving on. So looking then into finance. So the Apple Card credit limit bias happened in 2019. Some of you may be aware of it, some of you may not. But what happened? So women reported a much lower Apple Card credit limit than their male spouse or their partner. And that's with having similar or better credit profiles. So that triggered an investigation to this potential algorithmic gender bias. But why did it occur? So underlying credit decisioning system appears to have been trained on historical credit and repayment data, where women often had less individual credit history and more joint credit profiles, which reflected legacy gender norms. Again, you're looking at generations of data that's being used to train. So this model likely, if looking at it holistically, was likely relying on features like credit length or prior limits that they would have had for a loan or a credit line that would have correlated directly with their gender. Even if gender wasn't necessarily an explicit input, there's proxy variable bias that's present there. Let me go. So looking at this as manifestations at home, and you can see this as your day-to-day, how it affects the whole family. So in 2024, UNESCO study examined major large language models and found that consistently generated regressive gender stereotypes, homophobia, and racialized content. For example, women were 4 times more likely to be described in domestic roles than men. A fun activity, if you want, is to go to your favorite large language model and ask it to describe for you what a trans male may wear to work. What's the best appropriate attire for a woman versus a man. And again, based on gender role and prevalence, you're going to get interesting results there. So I challenge everybody to do that fun little experiment. But why do these things occur? These large language models are trained on this content containing imbalanced representation of gender roles. When you see commercials for, it could be, even like the cover of like 9 to 5 with Dolly Parton, or what it looked like in the 90s to be a career woman. That's going to start showing up. You're going to see heels and a pencil skirt, right? If you go back a few more years, it's going to, you're going to have gloves and a hat. And those things are now, again, they're still impacting how these models answer. Another example of this is, we look at the tools that we use at home. A lot of us have an AI assistant at home, whether it's on our phones or a little ball on your counter, or maybe a little disc hockey puck on your counter. Why do they have female voices? It could be a question you ask yourself. Why are we comfortable with this female voice helping us with recipes and shopping lists and kids schedules and things like that for a home tool? Because again, it was trained on the assumption that, well, this product is for home task, home roles, which again reflected women more prevalent than it would men. And I think that we could open the discussion at some point on why is it a female voice that makes even for customer service calls, the little AI that answers your little chat bot on any website you go to and you chat for help, why is it women, right? So even implementing like a lead generation system, why female voices, less threatening, or make you feel more comfortable or whatever it may be, but these represent historical gender norms that have continued to plague technology. So in education, so in 2020, the UK exam regulator, and I'm going to try, it's Ofqual, we'll go with that one, replace in-person A-level exams in a standardization algorithm. Okay, so during COVID, you have teacher predicted grades because, again, it's during this time of COVID. There's less presence, less interaction with students. So we now have algorithm that's unfairly degrading or downgrading students from poor neighborhoods and state schools because these models relied heavily on historical school level performance, not individual potential. Because again, we're utilizing data that we have. So where's the biggest data set, right? What are they calculating? And they're still taking in data from 20, 30, 40 years ago that mattered then, that may not matter as much now, without thinking about, I mean, how would they even know? So I'm not going to blame them, but how would they know today this is going to impact everything that we do on a daily basis, the way that it does? So how do we go, how do we move forward from here, right? And people ask me this question a lot of, well, yes, I hear all the problems and I understand that this is a thing that happens, but what can we do? And this is where I'll call out to Ms. AI. Okay. And I'll say it, I'll try to say it without the passion behind my voice, but when singular voices are present, you get singular outcomes. It's just that simple. So not only do all genders and minorities need to be present, they need to be active and vocal and lead the space as much as they can. And that can be done at home, that can be done at work, that can be done with your community, that can be done on a larger scale. But I think that it's very common for us not to be troubled with things. We don't like it. Some of us, our life could be falling apart because of it if we're still not being active. And I'm going to challenge, that's my call to us today, is that we challenge ourselves to have a voice in this process, because you're needed here. And I need you here, and we all need you here. But let's focus on a few tangibles. Okay. So first, making sure there's a diverse body of people present to review and supervise at home, a little harder at school, being included on committees, talking about AI implementation, about AI info sessions for children, whatever it may be, community outreach, etc. You go to the workplace, having task forces, committee work, having luncheons, sessions, things like this, for instance, where someone is just discussing AI. I think that many of us in our, and everywhere we go on a regular basis, whether it's work or home or school or you name it, the mall, people still go there. There's no dialogue. It's this is how I think and this is how you think, and it's very done. We have to get back to dialogue as far as hearing each other and having more cooperation, so that we are mitigating some of the singular consequences that we're still experiencing today. Being able to use more transparent models. So again, these are all choices. We talked about the model before. You can choose which algorithm you're using, appropriate for the data fit. Making sure that we are transparent in the development process, not just by the model, but the entire pipeline is transparent. Make that available to customers, make that available to consumers. One thing I love to say is that the only thing you can really control is where you put your money. Sometimes when you don't have a large voice or you have no voice at all, your voice comes through dollars and cents. So where are you spending your money? Are they giving you what you want as far as a transparent process? Are they revealing how AI is being used within the company? And you're allowed to decide then if you're going to support them or not. You're allowed to demand, you're allowed to ask. It's just things that we don't do. We don't think about it. We just kind of take it on the chin, like we have no other option, but we do. Having the process documented, training data sources, making sure that bias testing, having regular audits, having third party present within those audits so that it's not strictly internal. And I hate to say that because as a developer myself, I promise you, for many of us, that you're just sitting in a room making decisions on your own, whether they're short-sighted or not. But yeah, being transparent, disclosing usage, having data sets openly available for the public. No one wants to do that, but that's you're seeing it more common when you're publishing. They're going to want to see full data sets versus I have this big collection of data that I'm just not sharing with you. Of course, if it's able to be shared, if it's not having private information or going to hurt research participants. But having regular planned updates and new training data, being able to even publish those, publish the schedule of when things are going to be audited, publish the needs of having third-party auditors, people who will represent populations, people who will speak up and help bring a voice to the table that's not regularly heard, even, gosh, even on a volunteer basis, right? Sign the NDA and go for it. Get involved where you can. Balance data sets for current mass audiences. And this can be true with, you're pulling 20 years of data out of a SIS or, a system you're working within. That's going to reflect 20 years at the company. So if 20 years ago at year 20, there were 60% male, and 10% people of color, that's what your data set's going to look like. So adjustments have to be made to assume that the audience today, the users, that's going to be impacted by how that model's trained, how it's executed, implemented, and used, doesn't reflect that anymore. So how is that updated to reflect the people you're actually serving? Again, rigorous auditing and then diverse human oversight is always important. But one thing I feel is really important is going back to dialogue and having those conversations. It's very easy to go MVP, most, what's the minimum viable product that we can get out to market? Because, now I got investors and now we need to make money because, I'm already broke. And, you understand those things, but how then can we also implement conscious behavior and thoughtfulness and mitigation of what may come in the future today so that we're protecting future us, because it's moving so quickly. Something I build 10 weeks ago could come back at, a year from now. And, I still have to suffer those consequences. So it's not an inconsequential act. In fact, it's quite opposite, broad scale, massive consequence of not having that mindfulness and conscientiousness and taking action or caring enough to take action to be involved. But also companies that are building, developing, implementing, selling, making those choices beforehand can all impact a greater future. And this is why. So why it matters. Fairness and equity across all AI systems. So we have AI being used on a regular basis in your car, in your house, at work, you name it. It's literally in your child's bedroom, perhaps, on a Google whatever or Apple's product this. It's on their iPad. It's on your phone. It's in your purse. It could be on your dog's collar. As far as like a tag. This is impacting everyone. So again, it's not a singular result. Accuracy and reliability. So are we creating biased AI to the point where it's inaccurate, misleading outcomes? Those of you who are interacting regularly with large language models can see where, we're looking at data being pulled from the highest use, the most popular data, which then ends up being Reddit and these huge open access platforms and things like that. That's going to greatly skew the data that they're getting. So inaccurate results. Having more public trust and adoption, knowing how your data is being used, how your data is being managed. If you look at the terms between, the differences in regulations across nations, you can see a great disparity between how data is being used and how then it's also churned into either data sales or, being used to train other models or being used as, any other form of collection of data and why those might be used without saying that explicitly, but also economic implications. So this is impacting your investment portfolio. It's impacting how you shop, how you drive, where you go, how much your insurance costs, how much the technology in your pocket is costing. It's influencing your privacy and your image and your biometric data. All these things are factoring into what can somehow get sucked up into this umbrella of innovation and creativity. But sometimes, the innovation and creativity, while yes, moving forward, is also creating extreme negative impact to those who will, be purchasing the innovation once it's done. And then global perspective. So we are in a interconnected world. It just is the way it is. We rely on each other's economies, each other's markets. We rely on a global scale to have this interactivity. So how are we making sure that we are factoring in where this product will show up and how they're being used, and how is it that you can help influence and guide some of those things. So I'm going to ask, looking at Ms. AI, I know you're out there. I know you're out there listening. Where are you? Right? And some of you are heavily involved, and I thank you. And men are involved, and people of all ethnicities are involved. But how can we do more so that when we look at women and girls, that we're not reinforcing gender stereotypes, and we're not perpetuating discrimination in employment and career advancement, and we're not having a negative impact on healthcare where perhaps a woman is getting denied a certain treatment because the data says it's not going to work for her, right? um, how are we mitigating racial disparities, or sorry, educational disparities and economic disparities among who gets in, who doesn't? Pre-screening, it's efficiency, make it faster, make it better. We can get rid of an FTE, yay, yay, yay. But then who's losing now? Who are we leaving behind for the sake of efficiency? Who's getting left at the door, right? And we're moving forward. And then again, one more tool that limits and creates barriers to female voices in technology development. And the only way to fix that is to be included, to barge your way in. And it's not necessarily always a great place. I experience it regularly. Voices not wanting to be heard, the conscientious voice, or the I usually get like the sandbag to the balloon, like, well, that's really cool, but did we think about, and that happens so often on a regular basis. And then if you're too slow on the pickup, you get talked right over, and you have to either one, greatly assert yourself, or choose to, shut your camera off or stay silent. And these are places where women are needed so that we can start balancing how this technology progression is going into the future. I do believe it is your moment, because again, the future of intelligence, significant robots in your household, your car, how it drives, your work, how it screens you, how it monitors you, walking through your neighborhood, sending your kids to school if you have them, or attending school yourself. All that is now being impacted by this, and sitting to the side means you're not there, right? And you're gone. So how then can you come help shape it, challenge it, and claim your place? And I think that time is now, which is why I titled this presentation, It's Your Time. So that concludes my presentation for today. I do believe that the new era of technology demands your voice, new perspectives, definitely new perspectives, new leadership, and all of us have something to contribute.
Dr. Barnes, thank you. I've really appreciated your remarks today. When you were talking about, there are questions, and let me say, if you have a question, type it into the text chat. If you have a very long, involved question or comment that you want to make, raise your hand and I will activate the microphone for you. But let's take the questions that are out there right now. But before we take the questions, I was thinking long and hard about what you were saying about how you have a woman's voice on the GPS, a woman's voice on your Amazon device, those kinds of things. It reminded me of years ago when I was watching a Simpsons episode where Homer first had a GPS in his car. It had a woman's voice. He refused to follow its advice because he said everybody knows that women aren't very good at giving directions. You talk about a bias there, and I hadn't thought about the fact that I'm surrounded by these women's voices, and yet controlled in the background by mostly men. But anyway, back to the questions at hand. Let's start with Masha's question, which is what industry shows the best progression when it comes to AI implementation today, in reference to your presentation, of course.
Well, not highly regulated ones as far as privacy, like medical, education, and finance. They're trying. They're definitely trying. And there's definitely been progress made. When you say best, though, do you think she's referring to best as in fastest, or best as in most conscientious?
I'm not sure, Masha. Feel free to expand your question if you would like. All right. Good question. Best what is doing the best in a commercial way, I think is what she was doing. So it may not be specifically tied to to women in AI, but
So I don't think, and I say things probably too generally, there's a lot of challenges currently as far as fairness and transparency among all of these technologies, especially in countries where there is little to no regulation around how the models are developed and deployed and how fast, and little to no regulation. So any areas that are growing quickly in AI, in areas specifically local areas where there's less regulation, you're going to have a more of a free for all as far as how data is used and managed. Because again, data is also like a byproduct of the tool being used. And of course, that training data is as well. So I'm going to answer that with a more of a generalized answer with it's really important to be really diligent as far as how you review and how you're participating in some of those. Even today, with if you've refreshed your browser recently and you've been using Google, Gemini is there immediately. So have you gone in and turned off every feature that's going to monitor every click you have across, Windows? Or is that still on? But I mean, as far as, where it's coming up most prevalent is in day-to-day consumer tools that especially those that are enterprise level through either Google or less private platforms like that.
Masha says, thank you. Good answer. Aditya Gong says, regarding your way forward, would guardrails for LLM, large language deployment, be one of the important elements to address these biases?
No, it would come down to collection. So, if we're going back to looking at the model, how the data is collected, which and what data is being collected, where that's coming from and how it's sourced is going to start it all the way from how it's collected, whether it's a company collecting it or it's online or wherever that data set is being harvested, where the data is going to. Those particular variables is where things really begin. So how are we collecting data? How's that organized? What do we really want to capture? And then that's going to be fed into your actual model. It's going to either pass or, it's going to go through a cleaning process. It's going to go through a training process and a testing process. So really it comes down to what it is, or where it begins, I would say, from my perspective, would be in the data collection itself, which is why, right now it's really important to look at data management policies and privacy laws, collection, transparency, that kind of thing, as far as like any system that you're using.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't see any more questions at the moment, so I'm going to proceed with, and then we'll circle back one more time before the end of the presentation. I just have a few concluding remarks, and then we'll come back and see if there's any new questions that have come in. We will not have a webinar in December. Enjoy your break, enjoy the holidays. But then on January 15th, we'll hear from Dr. Rob Shaw, Critical Information Infrastructure Protection and Cybersecurity in New York State. And when you think about New York State and New York City particularly, you realize that cybersecurity and critical infrastructure protection is paramount to the success of the entire global economy, really. So I think you'll find that to be a very intriguing presentation. Then to register for any webinar or to view a webinar on demand, just go to this website here. And again, I'm going to be sending the slides to everybody, so you don't need to feel like you have to write that down right now. We offer a wide variety of degrees related to this webinar, to AI and to machine learning. And we encourage you to consider joining us for a master's or doctoral virtual information session. We hold them monthly. The next one's coming up will be in December. If you're interested, there's an email or a phone number, and you can also go online and find out more about it. Now, as I've mentioned before, we send a copy of the slides and a link to the recording to everyone who registered for the session, whether you're in the live session or whether you're later viewing it on demand. And we offer a certificate of completion that is available upon request. And when you get the email from me, which will happen later today, simply reply to the email with the name that you want on the certificate, and I will be happy to send that to you. And again, it's available to both people who are watching this live right now or who watch it later on demand. With that, that concludes today's webinar, but we have plenty of time, so I'm going to circle back one more time and ask if there's anybody who has any final question before we close up. And in the meanwhile, if you're typing there, watch for that follow-up email from me on how to get the participation certificate and a link to the recording of the slides. And if there are any, I don't think there in this particular one there are any presentation handouts. This is a standard slide I use for all of them. So Dr. Barnes, if you do want to have a handout, let me know and I'll forward it on. I hadn't asked for that earlier. So thank you very much, everybody. It looks like we don't have any more questions, so we'll go ahead and close this session up. My special thanks to Dr. Barnes again for this insightful presentation. It's been really interesting to think about the bias that's kind of hardwired into almost everything happening with AI and what we can do to turn off that bias so that it's a more neutral and helpful to all concerned. With that, we'll go ahead and close, and thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today.
Thank you.